Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kachanu b'mitzvotzav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I have my acacia wood. It was all I could do to stop from bringing it out but this is Purim Dika. This is what acacia wood. I think I've mentioned that before, right? Was that Target? I saw it. It said acacia wood right there, acacia wood spoon. We're committed to making product. This product is FSC certifies, which promotes environmentally, social, and economically responsible management of the world's forests. However, I'm not sure about what it's coated with, like I said. This product contains toluenes, ethyl acetate. Oh, okay, don't eat with it, just play with it. Not a salad, not for salad. However, I have it because it comes from in our memory book. Our memory book, the Torah, our memory book, it talks about acacia wood. Acacia wood and building that the tabernacle, a tent of meeting from acacia wood. And this week's Parsha even begins with God calling out to Moses from the tent of meeting. Last week, the tent of meeting was set up and it kind of came to life. And now we get this message from it, which is all about, well, it's the rest of the book in many ways. Today, in addition to being the Shabbat where we begin the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, it's the Shabbat before Purim, in which we read the section of the Torah that begins with Zachor, remember. So this is about memory, really. This is acacia wood. It's reminding us. It's like the Torah book itself reminds us. But this is a strange Shabbos. It's a strange Shabbos. Because on Purim is so silly, we often don't get a chance to talk about what it means. And the Shabbat before Purim is called Purim Shabbat Zachor, because we read, it's a troubling passage, and it is a passage also which brings up such contradiction. The passage we read is Zachor, it's from Deuteronomy 25, 17, 18, 19. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Amalek, it's a people. Remember what Amalek did to you. B'derech tzeitchem mimitzrayim, and on the way of your coming out of Egypt. Asher karcha b'derech v'zanev becha kol hanichol shalim achrecha v'ata ayef v'yagea v'lo yare Elohim. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came forth out of Egypt. How he met you by the way and smote the rearward parts of you, the hindmost of you, those that were enfeebled behind you and were faint and weary, and they did not fear God. V'haya b'chaniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies round about in the land, which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance to possess it, timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. You shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. Very troubling. Very troubling. I mean, the best thing that we can say, it's such a relief that we don't actually know. There's no identifiable people of Amalek today, although there may be reason for that. There's no identifiable people, so this is not a command to go out and schmeiss people. It gets turned into a command to defend ourselves against forces that are trying to destroy the Jewish people. Why is this read just before Purim? Because Haman, Haman, who, when we say Haman, when we read the Megillah, we make all this noise. What are we doing? We're wiping out his name. There are some who will write Haman on their shoes in chalk, and then they'll rub it, wipe out the name. In the beginning of the third chapter of the book of Esther, which we read tomorrow night, when Haman is introduced, he's called Haman Ha'agagi. Ha'agagi. Agag was the last king of Amalek. So Haman is identified as an Amalekite. Haman is identified as Amalek. Now, if Purim is actually not a particular event, historians have had problems placing it in a particular point in history. So maybe it didn't happen per se, except that it's happened over and over again. So if Purim is really a typology, it's something that happens over and over and over again, then Amalek is actually something that happens over and over again. It's not a people anymore. It is something that happens over and over again. There's something else about this. The passage is terribly convoluted, and maybe that's a blessing. It basically says, remember to blot out the memory. Don't forget. Remember to blot out the memory. Don't forget. So who actually remembers Amalek? We do. Because we were told to forget. So it's in our memory book, along with the acacia wood. It's in our memory book. We put it in the book and we remember because we're supposed to forget. It's actually kind of like Purim. You know, you're supposed to drink on Purim. You know, Purim is the only day of the year, of the day of the Jewish calendar, that it's a mitzvah to get drunk. There's another day when it's okay to get drunk. That's Simchat Torah. But it's a mitzvah to get so drunk on Purim that you don't remember the difference between who? What? You don't remember the difference between blessed Mordechai and cursed Haman. You don't even remember the difference. This is like wipe out the memory. Remember, wipe out the memory. Don't forget. Remember to forget. Are we to strive to navigate the tricky back currents of memory so that we don't recall the curses, we mix them up with the blessings? But can we ever forget? Can we ever forget? For many Jews, October 7th brought back so many bad memories. Maybe if the leadership in Israel had been able to forget a little, they could have reacted in a more calibrated way? Question mark. Question mark. Maybe if the Jewish people had been able to forget a little bit, could have reacted in a more calibrated way? Question mark. Netanyahu called them Amalek. Did you hear that? He called them Amalek. Perhaps Hamas is. But does that lead to a literal mandate to act literally? And don't put any trust in Netanyahu, actually. So who knows what he meant, but is it political rhetoric? Or was it? It is responding as if other peoples in the Middle East are Amalek, is what many in the anti-Zionist world would expect of Israel and of Jews if you read some of what the Presbyterian Church was selling 10 years ago. I do read what they were selling 10 years ago. They talk about Amalek Judaism. And here's a footnote to explain it. The Amalekite view of Jewish history includes the mitzvah of genocide. As reflected in 1 Samuel 15, it requires the elimination of the enemy, including men, women, children, cattle, etc. This was published as literally as a congregational study guide, distributed in Presbyterian Church bookstores. And listen to this. Zionism was and remains not just about the colonization of Palestinian land, but also about colonizing minds. Jewish, Arab, European, American. This book is filled with anti-Semitic types. It's not that anti-Zionism is necessarily anti-Semitism, but it often is. But then there is Baruch Goldstein. Do you remember Baruch Goldstein? What was it, the 1990s? He got upset about Muslims, Palestinians in Hebron, not taking their turn in the cave of Machpelah to pray and not making an exception and allowing Jews to pray there that day. So he came in with a submachine gun or something and he murdered 27 or 29 people while they were praying in the cave of Machpelah. He did it on Purim morning. I can't help but thinking that he thought they were Amalek. Now, he was a doctor in the community, and from what I was told, he was the first person that the army sent for when they saw what happened. Saw all these people needing medical attention, they called for the doctor. Oh, and Yitzhak Rabin, who was prime minister at the time, called him a foreign weed. He was a foreign weed in Israel. He's from Brooklyn. We shouldn't forget that American Judaism is a large part of the problem. This is why I keep on thinking that others of us should be speaking out more. It was Mordechai Kaplan who said in the 1950s, he said it in front of the conservative rabbinical assembly in 1952, 1953, 54. It's published in an essay called A New Zionism at the very end of a book. The very end of a book on conservative Judaism called Tradition and Change. He says, it will be for the diaspora Jewish community to act as a brake on the chauvinism that Israeli Judaism will inevitably come to because of their constant need to focus on self-defense. 1952, 53. He saw a role for diaspora Judaism in the Zionist enterprise and in Israel, because we have a stake there. and we shouldn't be told that we need to remain silent. Dialogue is one way of assuaging traumatic memories of past generations by engaging with generations today. Elie Wiesel spoke of the challenge of memory. I have to tell you, I think everyone here probably knows who Elie Wiesel was. I'm running into people who don't remember anymore. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986 because he spoke so much of the lessons of the Holocaust, if you could talk of that in that way. I don't know if he would have liked that expression, lessons of the Holocaust, but teaching so that it shouldn't happen again. He spoke of the challenge of memory in the 1990s when he went to Sarajevo. What was happening in Sarajevo in the 1990s? The war in Bosnia. And so many of the people in the Balkans were remembering. They were remembering how this people in the Balkans committed this massacre 500 years ago, so now we're committing this massacre now. And this people did this massacre 500 years ago, so we're doing this massacre now. He said, if only it's the use of memory, the challenge of memory, everything comes down how we remember, what we remember, and how we use the memory. You can use memory to remember what they did for you, remember what they did to you to take revenge. Or remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember that you were strangers in Egypt, therefore do not afflict the stranger. Do not repeat the trauma on others that was inflicted upon you. It needs to be done by all sides, though, although one side could model it. As I said, Purim is celebrated in such a silly way that often we do not get a chance to discuss it seriously. But it is a really serious holiday. It is about near genocide, after all. Genocide that didn't happen, so it was transformed into celebration. But there was extreme violence. Violence that didn't happen as planned, but violence that happened. If you take the Megillah, the book of Esther, literally. Of course, so much of the book of Esther seems to be satire. The king, he's a buffoon. The king, Ahasuerus, is a buffoon. He wants the ministers of his court, they have to get rid of Vashti because since Vashti didn't listen to the king, now none of their wives are going to listen to them. Haman wants to kill the Jews for the most trivial of reasons. Well, that happens a lot. Where satire is not always false. Satire is a way of talking about truth. And one of the satirical points that's repeated in the book of Esther is suddenly everyone was afraid of the Jews. Suddenly everyone feared the Jews. For a small and powerless people, such as the Jews, the thought that other peoples would be physically afraid of them is a form of satire and parody. Except in recent decades, it has not necessarily been so satirical. Jews have had power in parts of the world. And the pent-up fear and suspicion that some Jews hold still towards the world, built up over the past 20 centuries, can be unleashed in strange ways, often with provocation by those who would still want to act like Haman, evoking traumatic memories. Life, as described in a Purim scenario, is highly precarious. Things can change on a dime. There's a long tradition of private Purims. Did you know that? There's a long tradition of private Purims and of local Purims in the Jewish past. Private Purims. Someone would survive some terrible accident or threat or illness, and then would decree that forever going forward, their descendants would celebrate their survival. So they would have, the family would have a Purim every year on that day. Or the Jewish community of a certain town would experience some traumatic incident and come out alive. Maybe the whole town, Jews and non-Jews, would have experienced it. It might have been an earthquake or an epidemic, which finally ended on a particular day. It could be the rise of a tyrant or some sudden edict of persecution that was suddenly thwarted. And after the dire threat was gone, the community would declare that every year on the anniversary of the end of the threat, they would celebrate surviving that threat. So, over the years, there are any number of local Purims and private Purims. There's an article, I know, in Encyclopedia Judaica, where they list a lot of these. Maybe it's probably online too. Don't always believe what's online, but there's always something online. Ironically, that tradition is not widely remembered these days, possibly partly because the communities dissolved due to forced migration, or the town or family were wiped out in the Holocaust and are not even alive anymore to remember. So we remember, perhaps not those local or private specific events, but the phenomenon altogether, the larger historical reality. Life is precarious in general, and all the more so Jewish life, whether in the diaspora or in Israel. And we respond with joy for being alive, with gratitude, with remembrance, and ironically also with some amount of forgetfulness. Not being able to recall the difference between blessed Mordechai and cursed Haman. Sometimes it seems better to forget. At times I envy the ability of what seems to be so many average Americans, the ability to forget history. So many Americans have no real knowledge of history, so much that they forget so many bad things happen. They forget to be suspicious. That means sometimes they can escape the grudges of the past. It also means sometimes they're ensnared by the prejudices of the past because they have no idea how to put into context what's going on around them. Both. The opposite problem from what Elie Wiesel described seeing in the Balkans. No memory, amnesia. Memory is complicated, necessary, unavoidable. So we are instructed to remember, to wipe out the memory, and don't forget. This week, Shabbat Zachor corresponds, as I said, also with Shabbat Vayikra, which begins Vayikra el Moshe, and God called to Moses. We begin the book of Leviticus, which is a call to organize ourselves into sacred community. That's what the book of Leviticus is about. We think of sacrifices or gay bashing, one or the other. That's Leviticus. But it's actually about organizing ourselves into sacred community. So let us be cognizant of the role of memory in the life of our community, for good or for ill. Let's make it for good. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Purim Sameach.